everyone. I'm really excited to be here today. After all, you are our partners who help us create excellent experiences for our buyers and sellers. How many of you have tried the new generation of eBay APIs? Okay, not bad. I'm pretty much sure that after eBay Connect, everyone will be testing our new modern RESTful APIs. My name is Tanya Vlahovic. I'm an architect at eBay focused on various aspects of API lifecycle, including design, services portfolio governance, and the API maturity model. I'm also a lead architect for Buy APIs and an active contributor to eBay technology standards and patterns related to both internal services and externally exposed APIs. What really brings and adds value to the APIs are successful integrations. In the API world, we have two players, providers and consumers. Typically, the API providers define a set of rules that the API consumers must follow in order to get the best and the most out of the APIs. Not all API integrations are created equal, but my core message today is adopting best practices makes integration successful. What we truly believe is that we have delivered APIs that are intuitive and easy to discover, understand, and consume, and that you will be leveraging as building blocks to further grow your business. I have 4 areas that I would like to share with you in our time together today. Principles we based our APIs on, how to optimize your integration, how to simplify integration, and finally, the safe environment we cultivated for you to test your integration. So let's get started with the principles. Our APIs are classified into API context. This is something that Gail mentioned yesterday. So the API context is a logical grouping of capabilities. So far, we have 3 such contexts defined. Buy, which includes capabilities that enable purchasing eBay items from anywhere online, from any partner site. Sell includes APIs that enable sellers to manage their business, eBay business at scale. And finally, commerce, which includes capabilities that span across both buy and sell activities. A good example of an API that is a part of the Commerce API context of Commerce API family is newly released taxonomy. It exposes eBay Marketplace category tree, which may be leveraged by both buy and sell third-party applications. In addition, we also have quality levels defined for our APIs, beta and general availability. The purpose of beta is to give an opportunity to you to get an early access to the capabilities that we are planning to expose. That's also a great opportunity for us at eBay to get feedback from you. APIs released in beta may go through backwards incompatible changes. On the other side, GA releases are stable and production ready. In this slide, I have examples of 2 endpoints, one belonging to beta release and the other one to GA release. For our public APIs, we have defined standard for URI patterns that all our APIs must follow. So after the host name, we have API context. So the first example has commerce. The second one is sell. Then the API name, taxonomy versus inventory. And then the version of the API, which is accompanied by the quality level qualifier. So the first one is beta release, and the second one, GA release. Then we have information about resource, sub-resource, methods, query parameters, and so on. We love to experiment at eBay a lot, so we truly enjoy exploring new features. The purpose of our experimental capabilities is exploring, testing, and feedback. And our API contract supports such capabilities. Experimental capabilities may be discontinued. Experimental capabilities may go through backwards incompatible changes. But for sure, experimental tells and implies nothing about the quality, performance, and scalability of our APIs. And a good example of eventual experimental APIs that we may release in the near future is image recognition, for example. We version our APIs. Typically, adding new features does not require a new version. We just proceed with a minor release in such cases. On the other side, backwards incompatible changes are for sure a candidate for the new major release. Our ultimate goal is to drive you, our partners, towards our latest and greatest releases. But sometimes our partners, basically you, do not share the same interest of evolution with us. So we end up maintaining, supporting, and running multiple versions of the same API in parallel. All our major and minor releases are communicated on developer portal and are documented on developer portal and communicated to our developer community. And again, the version is part of the URI. We actually went over it a few minutes ago. APIs are vulnerable to many security threats. That's why we follow strict security policies at eBay. And controlling API access is crucial to both security and scalability. At any point of time, we need to know who is accessing our APIs, what is the volume, and what are the usage patterns. Pay attention to the usage patterns. I will give you an example later that illustrates why it's very important for us. We leverage Auth 2.0 protocol to address data privacy and some of other security concerns that we have. And all our APIs require an access token in order to allow your application to interact with our backend systems. Authorization scopes identify a set of resources and operations that may be performed on such resources that your client has an access to. In this table, I have a list of all our modern APIs and their associated scopes. So you can see that scopes are granular to a great extent. But the relationship between API and scope is not one-to-one. Again, let's go back to the definition of the scope. It's a logical grouping of resources that may be accessed and operations that may be performed on the resources. Some of the APIs require user consent, some of them don't. So I will go over authorization grant types that are relevant to our APIs shortly. I mentioned that all our APIs require access tokens in order to let your application integrate with our backend systems. Tokens are scoped. So whenever your application mints tokens, you have to specify one or more scopes depending on what your user case is. And that is a crucial difference between Auth 2.0 protocol and the old one, Auth and Auth, that we actually leverage in our traditional or old APIs. So Auth and Auth tokens are not scoped. So one token will work for all of the APIs. Access tokens are short-lived. According to our current security policy, their expiration time is 2 hours. But that may change. I mentioned that we follow strict policies, security policies, and our InfoSec may decide to change that. So the best practice is always take the expiration time that our authorization and APIs return back to you. Access tokens may be exchanged. Basically, we also support long-lived refresh tokens. Currently, their expiration time is 18 months. Again, that may be changed in the future. So again, leverage that information that we send back to you whenever we generate refresh token for you. Refresh tokens expire too. So when that happens, you will have to send your user again to the authorization code flow, basically to eBay sign-in flow in order to get the refresh token refreshed. In case of revoked, invalid, or not authorized tokens, again, send your user to the authorization code flow. That's the simplest remediation, I would say. Best practice is to refresh access tokens either when after they expire or when they are close to expiration. Otherwise, most likely, if you keep doing that whenever you want to invoke our APIs, you will run into rate limiter blocks that we will discuss later. And according to our security policies, your applications, basically you, have to ensure secure storage of tokens, especially when it comes to the longer-lived refresh tokens. So we have three authorization grant types that are relevant to our APIs. Client credentials flow, authorization code flow, and the third one is refresh token flow. So when you exchange your refresh token for an access token. In this diagram, I have two-legged OAuth 2.0 flow, which enables your application to get an access to the resources that are owned by the client. All you need to do is to pass client ID and secret to our authorization API. I have to mention that in order to integrate with our API, you must have a developer account created. So you have to go to eBay developer portal and create account. That's where you will obtain client credentials for all our environments that we have supported. If your client ID is valid, and if the secret belongs to the client, our authorization endpoint will just, the authorization API will just return back an access token that you can then use to integrate with our backend system. Second authorization grant type that is relevant to our APIs is three-legged OAuth 2.0 flow. So that is basically where your application needs to act on behalf of your user, who is also a registered user on eBay. So you need to send your user to eBay sign-in flow, when the user will go through the consent flow and give grant an access to your application. There are two possible scenarios. Your user may decide to decline the access to your application, which means that you have to handle that use case gracefully. Or your user may decide to grant the access to your application. But you have to be also cautious because you have to send us redirect endpoint. That redirect endpoint must match the one that you have configured on eBay developer portal. If that is not the case, this flow will fail. So once you get the authorization code back, you can exchange this code for an access token. Again, you need to pass client ID, secret, and redirect endpoint. If everything is okay, you will get an access token back and you can act on behalf of your user. Also note that at any point of time, your user may go to ebay.com and revoke the access to your application. So you will have to handle that use case gracefully as well. HTTP status, headers, and body truly describe the message. At eBay, we follow standard HTTP status codes to communicate back to the client what the outcome of the request processing is. In case of successful outcomes, we just stick to 200 HTTP status code family. So 200 HTTP code is just general success code. 201 is in case we create a new resource. So we have to communicate back the location of the new resource. 202 is in case of async calls. I will give you an example soon. 204 is when our response payload is empty. And 207 is what we leverage in case of bulk calls. Again, I will walk you through a couple of examples. In case of client-side failures, we stick to 400 HTTP status code family. And in case of system-side failures, those are basically failures that happen on our side, we just leverage 500. HTTP headers further annotate requests and responses. And typically, they are used for cross-cutting concerns. That's exactly what we follow at eBay. On the request side, we have authorization header for the barrier token, accept headers for the content negotiation, content type to communicate the media type of the request to the server, and we have two custom eBay-defined HTTP headers. The first one is end-user context, which carries information about end user, like a physical location, or affiliate ID, which is widely used by APIs. The second one is marketplace ID, which sets the business context for your user or application. On the response side, again, we have content type to communicate the media type of the response to the client. And also location, I mentioned that for newly created resources, we actually include the location of the resource as part of the location header. Our response payloads are coherent, well-formed, and well-defined. We leverage hypermedia links to some extent. In case of collection resources, if they have a large number of members, we actually have a pattern of paginated collection resources that we use. So in this example, I have, this is an outcome of our search by API. So I have a collection of resources, and I also have a few properties that describe the paginated collection resource. So basically, there is href, which is an example of hypermedia link that points to the collection itself. Then I have total number of matches. One more time, this is a response of our search API. Then next, which is a hypermedia link that points to the next page. Previous points to the previous page if applicable. Offset is a zero-based index that points to the, that's basically the index of the first member of the page. And then limit is the maximum number of members per page. We have two types of errors defined in our new modern APIs. Critical and non-critical. In case of critical errors, we stop with the processing. HTTP status code is either 400 or 500. And the response payload is just a collection of errors. So basically, on the client side, what you need to do is to check the HTTP status code first. And then, if it indicates errors, just to parse the response using our error schema. Errors are structured. Error ID is unique across all APIs. It's very useful when contacting developer tech support, so they will ask for that in order to help you. Then we have 3 error categories recognized. Application is mapped to 500 HTTP status code family, indicates errors that happen on the server side. Business errors are mapped to 409 HTTP status code, and request errors indicate errors on the client side, which are mapped to 400 HTTP status code. So let me give you a good example of the business error category. So that is basically what we use when there is any business policy violation. So let me give an example, which is very good, but is not really in the context of eBay, but still I think it will help you to understand how we actually decide when to go on with the business error category. So let's say that you want to transfer a certain amount from one account to another. So your request is perfect. You have 2 accounts. They are valid accounts. They both belong to you. Amount is properly specified. You have currency. So everything looks good. Still, your request failed due to insufficient funds. So that is an example of the business error. Messages are also part of the error structure, and they are descriptive rather than generic. So basically, we want to provide enough information to you, to developers, to understand what went wrong and what to do in order to fix the issue. In addition, we have a collection that we call input ref IDs, which is a collection of JSON paths that point to properties in request that caused an error. So this we widely use in case of validation. So we just want to actually surface back to the clients all the properties that failed the validation. And then on the client side, you can use that information for contextual errors when painting your UI and when building your UI. So let's say that you have a form with a credit card. If that credit card is invalid once you invoke our APIs, we will actually embed that JSON path that points to that credit card in the request, which you can then leverage to paint that credit card in red, for example, in your UI or whatever works for you. In this table, I have errors that are common across all our APIs. So, and also remediation steps, what to do and how to recover from such errors. In case of application error category, HTTP status codes are 502 and 500, and the remediation is just to retry the request. So that means there is something wrong going on our side. In case of request error category, when you get the invalid access token back, what you have to do is to regenerate the access token. If the error is access denied, I would say go and remit the token again. Most likely it's not properly scoped. You're trying to access something with the token which doesn't have all relevant scopes. When the resource is not found, verify what's going on with your URI. When you exceed our rate limit, try to do the throttling on your side if possible, or I will discuss later what are the steps and how to deal with that scenario and use case. And in case of any other request errors, just proceed accordingly based on the message that we send back to you. When it comes to business errors, they are intended to be displayed to the end user. So all other errors, in most of the cases, should be discovered during the implementation and integration phase, which means they are intended for developers, for you. When it comes to business errors, that is something that we expect you will actually show to your end users, and I explain an example of business error. Warnings are non-critical errors. In case of warnings, we proceed with the request processing, but because not everything went perfect, we still want to send information back to the client, back to you. So a good example is our search API, which is again a capability under our by browse API. And we support plenty of filters. So if you send us at least one filter which is invalid, so what we are going to do, so we will ignore that filter, drop that filter, still try to return search results to you, but we want to say that we ignored invalid filter. Some of our APIs support bulk capabilities. And that really helps improve efficiency of your application. So basically, you have a capability to bulk club multiple calls into a single HTTP request. So typically, in case of bulk requests, on the request side, we have a collection of individual requests. On the response side, we have a collection of individual responses. So order is not guaranteed. That's why we need to correlate each individual request with its own response. That's why we have a concept of correlation ID. Ideally, it's a single property, but maybe a composite having two or more properties. And that is part of our API documentation. We actually explain what correlation ID. And correlation ID has to show up in both requests and responses. One more call out regarding bulk requests. They are not atomic. That means that some of the requests may succeed, some of them may fail. That's why on the response side, we have status code, and we also have a collection of errors in case of errors. And in case of partial successes, we stick to 207 HTTP status codes. I have an example of a bulk call. Basically, in Marketing API, we have plenty of bulk capabilities. So in my example, what I'm actually trying to do is, from my campaign, to remove all ads that are associated with my SKUs. So I also want to clarify that all new Cell APIs support the new inventory model. So there was a little bit of a confusion half an hour ago. So in my example, you can see that I can remove ads using SKUs, using new inventory IDs that come from the new inventory model. So all Cell APIs support the new inventory model. So what I have here on the left side is my bulk request. So basically, I want to remove all of the ads from my campaign that are associated with my two SKUs. So I have inventory reference ID, which is basically SKU, and I have inventory reference type, which is inventory item. On the response side, I have two individual responses. In my example, they both succeeded. So correlation ID is inventory reference ID plus inventory reference type, which is a composite. And I also have to communicate back what the outcome of my operation is. So that's why I have a collection of ads that have been removed from my campaign. Some of our APIs support async capabilities, async requests. And that is basically what we have for long-running processes or long-running tasks. So typically, clients initiate the processing. We send back resource representation of the task. and expected task completion time. So the clients can keep polling to get the information about the task. And once the task is completed, I mean, if it is successful, we typically include some information about the task. So if we were about to create a new resource, there will be a link that will be pointing to the new resource. If it was some update or whatever, I mean, there will be some information about that. And that is basically the dotted line. So the client will do something based on the outcome of the task. Again, a great capability under Marketing API. So we have actually support for all kinds of reports, and they typically take a longer time, to generate. So on the left side, I have a request to generate my report. So I pick the report type, then I have date range, dimensions, metrics, report format. I have my campaign IDs. And on the right side, I have a representation of the task, which in my example is successful. So there is report href, which is a hypermedia link that points to my report. So the next step for me is just to grab the link, download the report, and then to analyze the performance of my campaign. Okay, so I already mentioned that adopting best practices makes integration successful. So I want to share more best practices with you. Most of our APIs support enumerated values or key value pairs. And what is possible is actually that we may introduce new values or new key value pairs. And we want you to gracefully handle such use cases. Similar applies to errors. If you introduce new error ID, which you do not handle in your application, just fall back to the HTTP status code and proceed accordingly. Our APIs are rate limited. So our ultimate goal is to safeguard the system from malicious attackers that are trying to disrupt our systems, or from spikes in consumption or inefficient applications. If our systems are down, you are not shopping. I assume that you all are eBay customers, so that is something that we cannot let happen. If you're still experiencing rate limiter blocks, analyze your application, try to make your calls more efficient, try to leverage bulk whenever applicable, throttle the volume if possible on your side. If you're still experiencing blocks, just file the ETS ticket, and then we will justify your needs and definitely try not to affect your business. All we want for you is literally sky to be the limit. So just, create your application, and we will make sure it will be working properly. A few more hints. So do not use APIs in the same way feeds are used. So I want to share a discussion that we had with one of our partners. So what they told us was, we don't want to use your feed API. We will use your search API and generate the feed ourselves. So we were a little bit puzzled, so I asked some questions. And the answer was, we will just go category by category, offset by offset, till we download your inventory. That is definitely not how we envisioned integration with our search and our feed API. And I mentioned that we keep monitoring usage pattern and behavior. So we will definitely be able to catch such use cases. Cache static data. Some of our APIs return really huge payloads. So a good example is taxonomy that we discussed today, right? So it exposes eBay Marketplace Category 3, which in case of US has 22,000 categories. So if you keep hitting and invoking taxonomy API whenever you need access to the Category 3, your application is not going to be efficient. So instead, take that response, dump it into your cache, and use it. Anyways, we refresh categories periodically. Right now, I think it's 1 per quarter. May become more frequent, but we document and communicate to our developers whenever that's supposed to happen. Scope requests. Try to actually provide all the necessary filters. get the data only that you care about, supply date ranges, make sure to specify fields and field groups. That way your application will definitely be more efficient. You will be able to get the results back from us faster. Logging is very important, especially in case of errors. So try and make sure that you will be logging entire response, including HTTP headers. When you contact DTS for help, they will ask for all these details. So pay attention to that. Optimize your calls. Leverage bulk whenever that's applicable and whenever available. Reduce the bandwidth. This is straightforward. Just make sure to enable gzip compression. Again, some of our APIs really have huge payloads. I mentioned taxonomy. The other one is item feed. So when we return an entire feed for a certain category and marketplace. So those are like huge responses. So in order to avoid timeouts, make sure to specify, to use, enable gzip compression. Retry your failed requests. Implement exponential backup, but be a little bit cautious there. So definitely you have to define a maximum number of retries. You have to figure out how to come up with the delays. So add jitter, randomize delays. Try not to have your client compete with other clients. But this will help only in certain cases, right? So if you are hitting the rate limit or if there are network hiccups, timeouts, or system errors on our side. If you keep retrying requests that are invalid, I'm hoping that our APIs will keep sending the same error back to fix your request. Open API initiative. So this is something new. We are very excited. For the very first time, we are exposing Open API spec for our new modern RESTful APIs. So our goal was to go on with the standardized, vendor-neutral, community-driven spec that is both machine-readable and human-readable to describe the contract of our APIs. So we leverage Open API, which is based on the Swagger spec, which has a large community behind it, has plenty of mature, well-tested tools, including Swagger Code Gen, and we truly believe that that will help a lot to you and basically streamline and simplify your integration with our new APIs. So I have a demo for you. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is basically I will show you how to integrate with our APIs by leveraging Open API spec. So the first thing to do is to download the Open API spec, and I chose by Browse API, and I will show you how to integrate with our Search API. So this is also a preview of our new revamped API documentation. And I think that a few weeks from now, this is going to be publicly available. So let me download my YAML spec. Okay. So the next step is basically to import the spec into Swagger editor and to generate the client. Okay, so on the right side, I have a contract of our Browse API. So there's information about security constraints, information about endpoints, request response, query parameters, types, and basically I have information that I need in order to start analyzing API and capabilities and so on. So let me generate the client. So like yesterday, I think we mentioned that Swagger supports more than 40 different languages. So I'll generate my client in Java. Okay. Let me unzip it. Okay, so the next step is to import my Maven project into my Eclipse. So what I'm going to do next is I will tweak a little bit the test class that was generated as well. Okay. So I have to comment ignore. Okay, then I want to search for hoverboards. Okay, so the next step is to get the access token. Okay, so I will go to developer portal. I have an account created there, and I can use API Explorer to get my access token. So this is also a revamped developer portal. So my favorite part are bunnies at the bottom of this page. So let me go to the API Explorer. So I want to test this in production environment. Okay. So I want to get out application level token. Okay. And the last step is I want to print my result. Okay. So let me run this test. Okay, I got my search result back. So I think that I integrated with our search API in less time than what I need to grab my coffee in the morning. Okay, can we go back to the slide? Okay, Sandbox is our safe environment for you to test your integration and to test our APIs. All our APIs are deployed in Sandbox. And this is a safe environment because you can test your integration or our APIs without having an production access and access to production items or leveraging production credentials, accounts, financial instruments. So that's absolutely safe for you to play with our APIs and to test your integration. So my conclusion today is measure twice, cut once. So first, try to understand your goals. Simply answer the question, why am I integrating with eBay APIs? Second, understand API capabilities and limitations. I already mentioned that the API providers define a set of rules that the API consumers must follow in order to get the best and the most out of the integration. And then design and implement the integration. So again, adopting best practices makes the integration successful. Finally, test thoroughly and iterate. Simple, keep integrating with new and enhanced capabilities that we keep releasing.